The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So each time I give a talk at Vesak, I seem to end up talking about the Buddha, not surprising, but I always end up talking about his kindness, because of all his attributes as the thing that comes through more than just about anything. I've been reading a book called Footprints in the Dust by Venerable Dhammika, and it's really interesting. He talks about the Buddha as a human being, and it takes this material from the earliest texts in the Pali Canon, not all the later, things attributed to him, but the earliest things. And it's kind of a bit sparse, actually. There's not all that much. A lot of those beautiful legends and things were later, but they're lovely. That lovely invocation we sang about the Buddha's birth and the regent, the four kings coming down and taking the poles to take him. I love that. Maybe it did happen. The people couldn't see them. Maybe it happened. Maybe there's some of the things that actually people say, oh, couldn't have happened that way. How do we know? A lot of things we do not see. A lot of things we take on faith, and maybe it actually doesn't really matter. What matters is that we see the Buddha, learn what we can about his life, because he was such an example, especially of wisdom and compassion, more than anything. So, you expect embellishments, and I have no problem with that. They are beautiful, as I said, and they're also a means of teaching. These pictures, lovely pictures of the scenes of the Buddha's life. Some of them happened, some of them didn't. We don't have to worry. But they're really helpful because they inspire us, help us to deepen our faith, and also a means of teaching. And the Buddha was a human being. He always said he was just a human being. He wasn't some super person. And he always said anybody could do what he did. Anybody could find the truth of themselves. The Dharma is for everybody, not just special people. He wasn't the son of some vast great king, as people, he gets bigger and bigger and bigger. No. And he never said his father was a king. The Shakyans, his clan, they were a fairly small clan, not widely, powerful or anything. They didn't have a kingdom. They probably had a little chiefdom, and his father was the chief, as far as I can make out. What do I know? As far as Venerable Dhammika makes out. But they must have been quite wealthy, because he said he was raised very delicately, exceptionally delicately, and he had, fancy clothes and nice food, and he had 3 houses to live in, one for the winter, one for the summer, and one for the rainy season. And he said this himself, so it must have been the case. He wouldn't have just made it up, So he lived in comparative luxury, but actually, to us nowadays, it might look fairly plain, because this was a long time ago. The 4 sights, the traditional story that the Buddha was kept from seeing the world by his father, because it had been predicted by the old, does seem to be in the Pali Canon, the old sage Asita, who came after he was born when he had his naming ceremony, and said he will be a great helper of beings. He will leave the world and become an ascetic and help beings, or however he put it. And his father didn't care for this because he wanted him to stay at home and be with the family and maybe take over his position. But the 4 sights, the story, maybe it happened. How do we know? But it's a very beautiful story, and it's a really helpful teaching of how the Buddha goes out and sees an old person and a sick person and a dead person and then a monk. And this is such a helpful teaching for anybody. Everybody gets old and sick and dies, if they're lucky enough to live that long. And there is a way beyond that. There's a way of finding something beyond that. It's really helpful for us. So who cares if it happened or not? The point is, it's helpful for us. Helpful for us to learn and to benefit from that. And as I said, some of these stories may be basically true. They might have been passed on informally and not put in the Pali Canon. Maybe they were considered not really necessary or some, who knows. But we don't have to worry. We can not dismiss them, and we don't have to completely believe them. But they're helpful. So, basically, the Buddha was raised in comparative wealth, and he was married and had at least one son, Rahula, who became a monk later. That's in the Pali Canon. He might have had other children as well, we don't know. And he left home. His parents weren't happy. It doesn't sound like he sort of snuck away at night, which is how the story goes. He crept out at night and nobody could hear him. But no, apparently he had quite a lot of discussions with his family about, so it would seem, about leaving home to become a renunciate, and they weren't very pleased, as you can imagine. But he did it. So, for 6 years he practiced asceticism, and he talks about this horrible things he did to himself, starving himself, and anyway, I won't go into it. But then he finally realized after 6 years, this doesn't help. So he gave it up. He had some good food, got his strength back. I don't think it was just one bowl of rice porridge, just seemed destroyed. I think he must have taken a bit of time to get his strength back, because he almost died, of asceticism, very, very skinny. And then he thought, okay, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to, try a different path. And he remembered that when he was young, there had been an incident when he was sitting under a tree watching his father work. Maybe he was ploughing for the ploughing festival, something like that. And the young Gautama, as he was then, somehow accidentally just fell into deep meditation and was just sitting there completely peaceful. And he remembers this later on. He thinks, oh, I've been doing this stuff for 6 years. Let's try this. Let's try just sitting. And he did it. And he went into deep meditation and finally realized enlightenment. Who knows how long that took? The story says it just, it took the all night, but I suspect it might have taken a bit longer than that. But we don't know. We don't know how much merit he had accrued to help him on this way. So he realizes enlightenment, and then there's always other stories about people he meets and so forth, and some of them are related in the Pali Canon, how he meets. The two merchants come by and give him some grass to sit on, and became his first disciples actually. But then you hear no more about them, And then there's I like the story. He's going towards Benares, I think. Anyway, somewhere to teach. Oh, he's going to find his companions. He had 5 ascetic companions. He's going off to find them, to show them, to tell them what he'd learned, because they were all training together and they all resolved that if any of them found the truth, they would tell the others. So he's looking for them. And on his way, he meets another ascetic, and this person is really impressed. There's the Buddha, radiant and strong and just really mindful and still. He says, whoa, who's your teacher? And, what have you learned? And he says, I don't have a teacher. I'm the only one who's found this. I've realized enlightenment for myself, and I'm the only one who's done that. And the guy says, okay, thank you, and good luck to you, friend, and goes another way. And then the Buddha thinks, well, maybe that wasn't too skillful, But it's his kindness. Of all the stories in this little book, and in the scriptures too, it's his kindness that stands out, his wisdom and his kindness. After his enlightenment, he first thought, I'm not going to try and teach this. Nobody's going to understand it. It's way too subtle. It's way too difficult. I'm just going to go off and enjoy it. But then one of the gods comes down. The whole gods got really upset about this. One of them comes down and persuades them, says, no, there will be people who will understand. Please, please help the world, teach people. He says, okay, I'll do it. And for 45 years, that's what he does. His life's purpose is to teach other people the way out of suffering. And that's what he did. That was his purpose. Not being a big guy, not being something special, not puffing himself up in any way, just trying to help people. And then all kinds of people came his way. He talked to kings, queens, Brahmins, soldiers, ministers of state, merchants, courtesans, all kinds of people. And anybody who wanted, who really wanted and was able to, he was allowed to be a monk. Just monks for now, not women yet. We'll get to that. Even people of the lower castes who had always been kept out, because the Brahmanism was getting strong there and had the 4 castes, the warrior caste, which was his caste, the Brahmins, who considered themselves superior to the warrior caste, and the merchants and farmers and so forth, and then the lower castes who did the lower jobs, and then the untouchables who did things like cleaning out toilets, dealing with dead bodies, dealing with meat, leather, and things like that. And there's a lovely story about the night soil carrier, which some of us have read. There's this person who is, and he carries the people's night soil, i.e. poop and urine from the night. And they have it, he collects it up from people's houses and takes it somewhere, some dump or something like that. And there he is with his soil, and he hears the Buddha's teaching. We hear that he's teaching, and he goes out on the outskirts of the crowd because he's smelly and untouchable, and he's standing on the outside of the crowd, and the Buddha sees him and knows he's there, and he comes over, and the carrier is so frightened he runs away, drops all his poop, runs off and falls to the ground. And the Buddha says, "Don't worry, do you want to be a monk?" And he's completely overcome by this. What? And of course he does. He wants to be a monk. And he becomes a monk and becomes probably a very good one because he has plenty of impetus to do something. But it's such a lovely story because this is completely unheard of, that somebody who's an untouchable would be allowed into the monastic sangha to live with all the people who'd been Brahmins and warriors and all those other things, to live with them and be accepted and allowed to just purify his heart. And I'm sure they'd washed him first. But I thought it was just a particularly beautiful, kind story. And that is something completely unheard of in the Buddha's time, that somebody would do such a thing. Well, women. The Buddha would talk with women, housewives, queens, courtesans and others. Courtesans weren't looked down on as much as they are nowadays here. They were respected, actually, because they were very well educated, But anyway, he talked with these people with a sympathetic understanding. He would show to men, women, farmers, kings, courtesans, queens, anybody, soldiers. A general comes to ask him for his advice, and he gives him very good advice, General Siha. Just all sorts of people, because he was from the warrior caste, all sorts of people would come to talk to him, and he would meet them on their own terms and talk to them in ways that would help them most, not in a kind of condescending way at all, but with respect and kindness, always with respect. The women. Well, for a while he wouldn't ordain women. It just wasn't done. Women were always under the kind of rule of the man in the family, whether it was their father or their husband or even their son. They didn't just have a free life. They couldn't just do what they wanted. And to be allowed to renounce the world and leave home life was kind of unheard of. I think there were a few who did it, but it was not done. And his stepmother, Mahapajapati, comes to the Buddha and says, "Please, let us enter the order. Let us become nuns." And he says, "No." And she asks again. He says, "No." And then later, Ananda hears about this. He always had a kind heart for the women because you see how it was. And he asks the Buddha, "Can women realize liberation? Can they free themselves?" He says, "Oh yes." So he says, "Well, And finally the Buddha relents and he lets them, Mahapajapati and a whole bunch of other women, become nuns. And they did great. And then he really respected them. He would praise them, and because they were really, motivated. So a lot of them are very, very well. They were intelligent, learned, and deeply realized women. There's poems about some of them. And he gave them 8 extra rules, which to this day rankle with some people. The particular one that people don't like is that any female monk, any nun, no matter how senior, was junior to the most newly ordained male monk. And that was hard for them to take. It's still hard for them to take. And in many traditions, actually, they don't do that anymore. We don't do that. And I know a venerable monk, Theravadan monk, he says, age trumps sex, i.e., the years of ordination, how long you've been a monk or a nun, is more important than what gender you are. So when some of us went over to his temple, he'd have men and women would sit on different sides of the hall, which is normal, men on one side, women on the other. But then when we went for food, we'd blend in so that you were in ordination order. And I thought that was such a skillful thing to do, so that you weren't having the men first and the women after, but you just blended in together, and then we sit on our first sides and then eat our meal. I thought it was really nice. But people thought this was unkind of the Buddha, but actually it was revolutionary that he would allow women to lead the household life, to come and be nuns, to live their monastic life, even to travel, but he was concerned about them being in danger, and sometimes they were attacked and raped and murdered and so forth. Not very often, but I think it happened. So he made, some of the rules he made were to protect them from harm. But then he would support them. Having admitted them, he supported them, as I said. Praise them. Now, in the Pali Canon, there's lots of conversations reported. Talks he had with people, all kinds of people. And he was always polite and kind and would say, what can help this person? He'd get rude Brahmins coming to dispute with him, and he'd get the best of argument if that's what they wanted, but then he'd be kind to them, and sometimes they would be converted. They'd think, oh, he knows more than I do. I think I'd better become his disciple. Let go of my views. Even when someone was sometimes people could be really rude, and then he might reprimand them. This is not done, this is not polite. But he wouldn't be angry, and he wouldn't be unkind, he wouldn't be rude. He would say, no, we're not putting up with that. And sometimes they would apologize, and sometimes they were converted to his teaching. He could be tough with his own monks, but it was always out of kindness. It was to help them. And there's stories of that, like when there's a whole bunch of young monks come, they're really noisy and they're all quarreling, or making a racket, coming to his place, making a racket. They say, who are these people? And somebody tells them, he says, send them away. I'm not putting up with this. Send them away. And they went away, and they thought, okay, so I think later they were allowed back when they were quiet. But he wasn't going to put up with this noise, so he wasn't a pushover, but he would try to help people, and would help them too. You can't be noisy. You're going to be a monk. You've got to be quiet. You can't come and make a racket and disturb people or be, thoughtless. The quarrel at Kosambi, some of the monks were quarreling over something, and they wouldn't put it down. And he kept trying to make peace, and they wouldn't put it down. Finally, he got so fed up, he just went home, sorted out his room, and left without saying anything to anybody, and went away by himself. He was really fed up with them. So that was about as far as he went. Then they realized he was gone, and thought, oh. And the lay people were not happy about these monks quarreling. He wouldn't feed them. And that got their attention. So finally they sorted it out, made peace, and the Buddha finally came back. It's a nice story about, I don't know how true it could be. The Buddha's out in the jungle, and here he is, having left all these quarreling monks, and he meets an elephant, and the elephant's all fed up, big male elephant. He says, the female elephants and the baby elephants, they push me aside, they'd muddy up the water, they give me no peace and quiet, I'm just fed up with the whole boiling of them. And the Buddha says, I know just what that's like. So they kind of commiserate, and then finally the Buddha goes back. I think it's a lovely story. How true is it? We have no idea, but it's a nice story. So, monks about, rival kingdoms going to war. He tried to get them to make peace. Again, there's one situation where they kept being about to have a battle. He'd bring peace. The third time doing it, he says, I can't stop them. I just had to let them do it. He could not stop them fighting. So they did, and lots of people got killed. When he was dying, well, actually at the end of his life, he was 80 years old, and Kanda gives him a meal. He goes for a meal at the Kanda, the blacksmith's house. Blacksmith. He goes to his house because he's been invited, so he goes there and has this meal, and there's all these little discussions about what it was. And then a day or two later, he gets really sick. Well, it could have been Kanda's meal, or it could have been something else. Who knows? Maybe he drank bad water. And again, our Venerable One says, maybe it wasn't Kanda's food at all. You can get really sick. It sounds like gastroenteritis, really sick. But Kanda would have felt bad. So on the Buddha's deathbed, some weeks later, he says, tell Kanda not to worry. He's probably felt really bad. He might have poisoned the Buddha. Wouldn't be good. But don't worry. There's two ways of making great merit. If you give a Buddha a meal right before his enlightenment, or if you give him his last meal before he dies, there's great merit in that. So he has earned great merit. Not to worry. Such kindness. Here he is dying, feeling horrible, and he thinks of Kanda. Subhata, somebody who wants to come and be a monk. Right? He's on his deathbed. And here comes this person saying, please admit me to the order. And the Nanda tries to keep him away. Says, no, he's sick, leave him alone. But the order says, who's that? Lets him come and ordains him right on his deathbed and says, and he becomes an arahant quite quickly. But right to the very end of his life, he's helping people, right to the very end. Because he always said that's what he would do, and he did. Selflessness and kindness all through his life. Selfless service, helping other beings. So, this is what we can do. Practice kindness. The world needs kindness now more than it ever has. Well, we always think that, but really things are not very good at the moment. So, to practice kindness. It helps us to break down that barrier between me and other people, Sometimes if we're afraid, if we hesitate to do something kind for somebody we don't know, maybe they'll just glare at me, or they won't receive it well, or maybe they'll be angry. But usually they're not. And usually people respond to kindness. We all respond actually in the heart to kindness. We read all these stories about people doing kind acts, and you always respond. You think, yes, yes. So not to be afraid of saying something kind to somebody we don't know, helping somebody on the street, or just anything, or the people we know and love, being kind to them. Always to err on the side of kindness, and not thinking maybe they won't like it, or maybe, not thinking about ourselves, not being fearful, but just being kind, because that breaks down those barriers between me and everybody else, us and them, and all that. To think kindly of people we may not know or may not like, whether we know them or not. To try to have a good heart for people, no matter who they are or what they may do, to try to think of them with kindness. Kindliness. Actually, that's another thing attributed to the Buddha. It's not just being kind, doing kind acts. Kindliness, I was thinking of this. It's like having a kindly attitude. It's your way of life, kindliness. You're not just doing nice things for people. A kindly heart, that's what we'd like. If somebody looks angry and miserable, they might need kindness more than anybody, but we can hesitate, thinking, well, they look angry and miserable, maybe I'll stay away. But actually, a kind word can really change that person's life, change their day, we don't know. To practice kindness, it helps us break out of our little bubble of self-concern, head down in our phone, not looking at anybody, or just thinking only about what I have to do, or what I'm going to get for dinner, or whatever, not thinking about the people right nearby, Judgment. Kindness undercuts judgment. If you're thinking of kindly of people, you're not judging them. You can't have kindness and judgment in the same breath, really. So if we can be kind and see the best in people, we don't have to have opinions about everybody or about everything. What a thought. I don't have to have a view. I don't have to have an opinion about this person. I don't have to worry, actually. Just let them be themselves and be kind. If I'm not, have kindness in thought, word and deed. Kindness of thought, not just doing kind things or speaking kindly, but thinking kindly of beings. That really, really helps. Undercuts our judgment, our critical mind. To see the best in people if we can. Trust their good heart, because everybody has a good heart somewhere. And if people you think are not doing very well, well, maybe they're selfish, maybe they're clueless, maybe they've been hurt. How do we know? We just don't know. But there's goodness in everybody, just to trust that that's there. The Metta Sutra that we chanted today, offering merit to beings, to all beings, short or small, here, there, everywhere, in all the directions, in all places, all kinds of beings, not just humans, but all kinds of beings, to offer merit for everybody. It's a wonderful practice, May all be happy. And to practice kindness, it helps us to keep a bright heart, to connect with other beings, to counteract ill will, both our own ill will and other beings' ill will. Somebody's crabby and we're kind to them. It's hard for them to maintain that, actually. They have to work at it. If we're crabby and we notice, oh, that was a crabby thought, that was unkind thinking about somebody, maybe I can let it go, or try to remember their good qualities, because everybody has some, just to counteract our ill will, to let go of it, to let go of our judgments and critical mind and so on. I'm sure that's what the Buddha did. I mean, he was a human being. He must have had people come by and think, oh God, somebody comes all crabby and cross and trying to beat him in argument and whatever, but he'd be kind. He would let go of that, probably. Maybe he didn't think, oh God. Maybe he just thought, oh, how can I help this person? I don't know. But if he had any ill will arise, he would let it go, and he wouldn't vent it. We don't have to vent it, and we don't have to buy into ill will, whether our own or somebody else's. Or the criticism, slander, attacks, Yes, the Buddha had all people were slandering him, they would be beastly to him, they would come to argue with him, physically attacked him, that was a bit much. And finally, when his cousin Devadatta was just slandering him right and left and trying to splitting the order, actually, that was what really was the worst. When setting wild elephants on him and all that kind of thing, okay. But taking away his monks and telling him that there was a better way, well, he got his monks back. Then he said, don't listen to Devadatta. He went out public and said, don't listen to Devadatta, he's not following my teaching. That was about as far as he'd go with that. So, how can we do as best as we can to live in that way, to let go of our ill will and judgment? And then this little thing, may we share in the merit that fills the universe. There is merit that fills the universe, whether we know it or see it or not. Merit that fills the universe, boundless merit in the universe. Can we share in it? Can we let go of our little crabby little bubble, Oh, it's so much bigger than me. It's so much bigger than all of us. All this stuff I know nothing about, all this stuff that goes on, all these people I don't know, these beings I don't see, may we all share in the merit that fills the universe. Like Julian of Norwich, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, for there is a force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and will never let us go. So, it's there, whether we see it or not. We can entrust ourselves to it, and we can entrust other beings to it. And that's our talk for the day.